My name is Amy Uyeki, and this is the book I illustrated. It's the Extraordinary Voyage of Kamome. A tsunami boat comes home, and it was written by Lori Dengler and Amia Miller, and I did the illustrations. The boat, Kamome, the boat that came across the ocean and landed on the shores of Crescent City. And to me, it was sort of a magical tale, and I had read this book that was, it's a fictional book, but it's about this diary that's found in British Columbia that came from a woman in Japan that came because of the tsunami. And so when this real life story happened, it really grabbed me in a way that spoke to the magic of just sort of imagining this tragic thing happening on the other side of the ocean, and then having this very personal item come on the other side, and what stories must have preceded the travel of the boat, and the stories of the traveling of the boat across the ocean, what that must have been like. They found basket or volleyballs, or a lot of different objects that have ended up here in the United States that have come from Japan, and some of them have been returned, and they're always really heartwarming stories. So that story really pulled me in initially, and then Lori Dengler was given my name as a suggestion for being the illustrator by a mutual friend of ours, Kumi Watanabe-Shock, who is a person who actually works for the library, and she is Japanese born and speaks fluent Japanese, and she was able to identify the writing on the boat and identified it with Takada High School in Rikusen, Takada. So we had a personal connection.
Taking it back a little bit more, how did you find yourself becoming an artist? At what point did that really kind of start to become a big part of your life?
So that is taking it back quite a few years, because I'm 63 now, so I would say probably 60 years ago I started drawing, and it's always been a part of my life, trying to record things I've seen, and I really think that I tend toward the narrative. I always have, even though I don't feel like I'm not a natural drafts person, in the ease of drawing exactly what is there. I want to tell a story, and that's been with me since I've been a little kid. So I've always had art making in my life, doing creative things, and this story really appealed to me on many different levels, and one of them is the connection with Japan, because I've told stories of Japanese American history, but not one that's Japanese and American collaboration. So it really appealed to me on many different levels.
What was your favorite part about the act of actually illustrating the book?
Oh, that's a really good question. There were so many aspects that I enjoyed. I found a lot of them challenging, because I'm, as I said, drawing realistically pushes pushes the envelope as far as my skills are concerned. I tend to draw more stylistically, but I had full freedom from my two collaborators, Amia and Lori, and they were real supportive. So I think that part of it, just working with the two together and feeling a real part of the team and what we were developing, was one aspect I really enjoyed a lot. Another I would have to say is I felt like I had maybe a little bit more of an into the Japanese culture, but there was a lot that I could learn, and so trying to portray mannerisms and how these students would react to the situations they were in and the cultural exchange that they were having, and also the tragedy that they were facing and had faced with the tsunami, and losing their homes and family members and possessions. How to portray that was a wonderful challenge for me.
Would you say that you had a significantly more artistic freedom with this than you would on a different project?
I think the freedom I had was maybe stylistically, but I did feel like I had to be accurate in terms of what I was portraying, and I combed through hundreds of photographs. I watched videos. There was a lot that I had to get accurate, and sometimes you think, okay, you know, it's not going to matter if this, you know, boat doesn't look exactly right, or this gull, the foot looks a little strange. But I've noticed when I've done other illustration that there is an expert everywhere on every aspect that you put out there, and that person, you know, that's something that is so intimate for them. They know it so well, and when it's off, it's glaringly off for them. So that was something that I really had to pay more attention to. But in terms of the freedom, I felt like I wanted to work in, I often work in woodblock style, and I mean I work on wood blocks and I print them, and so I wanted this to look like a wood block, but we had a real time limitation in terms of getting the book out. I think it was started in the summer. We were trying to coincide it with the 5-year anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami itself. So we had about a 6-month leeway in getting the book out, and Lori wisely recommended that maybe that actually doing wood blocks would not be work within our time frame, and so I went for a woodblock style, which worked out fine. I was able to do drawings and then develop them in Photoshop, and then sort of develop a woodblock looking style. So.
What is your process for the illustration? So you mentioned Photoshop and you've mentioned Toon Boom. Has your kind of artistic process changed a lot, kind of moving into the digital age?
Oh yes, my process has changed a lot, and I'm glad that I sort of rode the wave into digital artwork, I guess. I still feel very much rooted in doing things by hand, but and some of my animations that I've done, they've been, as I said, started in a traditional way, such as woodblock or pastels, then photographed and taken into a digital program, whether it be Photoshop or Toon Boom animation, and then manipulated from there. But in some cases, like as I got more and more comfortable, I always started from a pencil drawing for this book. And some of them were more line drawings, or you know, they were more fully developed. But then I have a Wacom tablet, so I draw on that, and I use Photoshop, and I use sort of a subtraction method where I use the erase feature to make unintentional marks. Unintentional being that what I really like about woodcuts are when you print, you get all the places that you don't mean to print, the indentures of the block itself that make the piece more interesting, and I had to put those into the pieces to make it look that way.
Yeah.
We had one piece, I'm trying to think if there's more than one. There's one piece that actually came from a woodblock that I had done for another series. That was, I called it Passages of the Spirit, and it was a tale of a woman coming over from Japan, but it's mythical in some ways, and crossing 3 generations, coming to the United States. And there was a scene of her coming over with other people, and they're on the backs of turtles. And when Amia and Lori were trying to visualize what the tsunami would look like, they went to that wood block. And because I had come up with these other drawings that were too graphic, they were probably not scientifically correct. I think Lori didn't feel like they were correct in how the tsunami came in, though some of them were inspired by the images that I saw through videos, which were pretty horrific, of the town just being swallowed by the tsunami. That's too graphic for a children's book, so we left those behind and used these woodcuts, this woodcut that I had, and took out, I had to sort of stretch the image, and I took out the figures in there, and the turtles and the people, and left in the gull that is kamome, which the kamome means seagull, and that appears in every scene that the boat is in. So we had that as an image. And the rest, the waves worked for Lori, the scientist, as well as Amia, and how it would be interpreted by the Japanese people who had experienced the tsunami. She felt like that was a safe enough image, it was abstract enough, but it did have the fury of the waves with it.
Are you thinking about your audience? So in this case, it's a children's book. How much does that affect your artwork? Does that kind of interrupt your normal artistic flow much? Or is much of your art also for children, or is this new for you?
So again, this is a really good question, because we did have to take that into account, writing for a certain audience. And so it did affect it, but I think the writing came before the image, and so I was trying to depict what the words were saying. So already the words had gone through a process where they were being written for a certain audience, and initially it was preschool. It was going to be preschool because that was the age that Amiya was working with in Japan, helping different students who were really having trouble with their new lives that they were having post-tsunami. But we quickly realized that that was too young, and so it developed that it was around the second, third grade level. So I was responding more to the language that was written already and had been adjusted to that level. And so to try and do it as simply and images that students could understand at that level. And I've had kids and I've taught art in the school, so I have a general idea of what kids can understand. I didn't know what exposure the Japanese students had in terms of picture books, and as it turns out, that was very different, and this was a different kind of book for them than what they were normally exposed to. They weren't exposed to such a real life story dealing with feelings and hardship at a younger level, and also the style was different. I guess they were used to more cartoonish, animals that could talk and things like that.
How did you like working with a story already, with a narrative already in place? Did that help you with your artistic process?
Sometimes it's nice to have parameters, and because you can push against them, you can go as far as what there is there, but if you don't have them at all, then it's almost like it's too much to choose from. So it actually helped me, and within that range, there are a lot of subtleties that you can, even with the words, the story, because I worked from page to page, and what was written sort of determined what I was going to create. That even helped me in some ways to be able to find within that direction some subtle ways to tell the story because I was looking for small gestures that could be picked up by just maybe a hand touching something, or the way the body is held, and so that allowed me to have that freedom. There was one situation where for the most part the story was already written, but we shared it with different people.
So normally with illustrations you don't have an explicit narrative, a story written out already. So how, in this experience that you had with this book, how did you enjoy having those specific parameters for you already?
Well, one thing, the parameters were this wonderful story that happened to be true, so I wanted to visualize that. And the other is that without having those, there's a certain amount of freedom, I feel like, that comes from having parameters and knowing that, okay, you need to be creative within this framework. I think when you think of a classroom assignment, I always liked those for art projects because it gave you a starting point, and what each person does with that could be totally different, and that's where I did feel like I could bring my own perspective into that realm. So I did have a lot of freedom within that structure of the words and the story. In one particular instance, part of the story was created by something that I brought in, and that was we were having this story reviewed, and the illustrations reviewed by different people, and they were preschool teachers and regular teachers and young kids. My cousin is a librarian, a college librarian, but she has a young son and daughter, and so she read the story to her son and daughter. Her son was, I think, around 7 or 8, and he said, yes, I like the story, but wouldn't it be more exciting if the boat ran into some sharks on the way over, and something to that effect, and so we didn't have that happen, but I thought, well, he has a good point. This boat crossing the ocean must have looked strange to, when you look from the bottom up, it's a tiny little boat, and it's crossing in places where probably boats like that don't cross, and there are probably sea animals wondering, what it was. And also, by the time it got over here, it was filled with barnacles, so it was like this living ecosystem in itself. So it must have looked really strange, and so his input became part of the story, and was written to that effect. And also, I had the beginning of this illustration that was heading that way, but that we ended up not using because it didn't fit into what was written at that time, but when he suggested that, I put it back in, and that became the favorite illustration, at least my favorite illustration in the whole book, because it really spoke to that wonder that this whole story has about it.
Now, you've discussed it in several different questions, but could you tell me, how important is this book to you personally, and why?
I felt after the tsunami happened, it was such a tragic event, that I really wanted to do something to help. And we sent money over, but that just didn't seem enough. And this story was such a heartwarming story that it was a way of getting involved in something that was fostering friendships, and was in a way helping by creating those friendships across cultures, and connecting people, was sort of showing that, no, you're not alone, that people care. And also to get out that idea to young people that small gestures do make a difference, and you may feel like it's what you do, whether it's good or bad, can touch people, and can touch people in a really strong way. And so those things are really important, and that's to have it actually happen in this story, and be able to be a part of making other people aware of it, was really important to me. And I think because I'm a third generation Japanese American, and having both of those cultures in me, the American culture and the Japanese culture, it was nice to have it come together in this story.
Awesome. Would you say there's a greater responsibility when the subject is more personal, and when the story is based on, or at least referencing, a real event?
You say that one more time.
Sure, no problem. Would you say there's a bit more responsibility on your part when there's a story that's personal to you and it's referencing an event like the tsunami that actually happened? Do you feel more just responsible for your work and people seeing it when it's a serious subject like that?
I think that it's accurately describes my own approach to this project. This is not a small event that happened. It was a tragic event, but that glimmer of hope that this story presents was important to bring out and to share. So I did feel there was a certain amount of responsibility. Also, to be able to reach two different cultures, which was addressed a lot in what was written in Japanese and what was written in English. They weren't mere, it wasn't a mere translation. It was the Japanese was written to the Japanese children's audience, and the English was written to American English-speaking audience. I did feel like it had to be right on a lot of levels, and couldn't be frivolous, and I also felt like there were so many things that I didn't know about the age group of the children in Japan that I needed to know more about. So getting that right, the cultural things, was really important. And I don't know if I got all of them right, but I haven't. If I got some of them wrong, no one shared those with me, which may be a cultural thing too, and not wanting to point out things that were wrong. I know that when we first did the scene at the high school, the Japanese high school, Takata High in Rikuzen, Takata, I initially showed the high school students with backpacks, and then later found out, well, the high school looks fine, but the high school students don't wear backpacks. They all wear these shoulder bags, and so you got that completely wrong. Those are younger kids, and the uniform, there were a lot of things that were specific to Japanese high school students. So it was wonderful to be able to meet them when they came. I've gone to a couple of gatherings in Crescent City when they've come as the exchange students here.
And segueing off of that, I think the last couple of questions here, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
What has your reception been like for this book? Have you gotten more or less reception than normal for a project of this magnitude, you think?
That's a good question. I don't know, because I've done a book before. I've done a couple of book projects, but not children's books, though I've always been interested in illustrating children's books, and I've also been interested in writing them. And I know by this project it's not an easy thing. I think that the fact that it's a true story really appeals to a lot of people, and it's also a personal history here in not Del Norte County, but along the Northern California coast. And we're touched by earthquakes and tsunamis, so there is a real connection there. So that, I think, resonates with a lot of people. I think that's probably what's brought a lot of interest, and also the fact that we're now translating it into many different languages that also widens the scope, so it opens up to many more people. And I forgot to mention the whole adding on of earthquake preparedness and tsunami preparedness, that's so much a part of Lori Dengler's contribution to Humboldt County, and that's part of the book. And also that children can often lead in being ready and knowing the right steps and not panicking, and knowing what they're supposed to do when there's a huge earthquake, there's a chance of a tsunami, what are those steps to take, and to let other people know, including adults. And so having that in the book is really important, and I think that that's widened its scope and brought more impact, because there's messages on a lot of different levels.
Going off of that, is there something specific that you learned in this process that stuck with you more than anything else?
Learn in the process of illustrating, or?
Yeah, and illustrating and collaborating with to create the book.
That's a good question. Let me think.
No problem.
I like collaborating, and this was an interesting collaboration because it was done a lot with Skype, and especially with Amia. You know, we're on, I think it's 13 or 14-hour difference in time, so we had to coordinate the times that we would talk about different aspects of the book, and so I enjoyed that, and that was something sort of unexpected and actually I think we're pretty much all on the same page in terms of the direction that the images were going. So I felt like what was said was really helpful, but I never felt like when I presented something, it was, oh, wrong way, you know, you don't want to do that, or other than the backpacks. Everything else, it seemed like we were building on each other, so that was really nice. And it was a very organic process all the way through, including the being published by HSU Press, Library Press. That was also just sort of happened at the same time that the press was coming about, and meeting Cyril and finding out that this is, yeah, they were interested in taking on this project, though most of their publications are now more scholarly, and this being a children's book was in a different avenue, but they were very willing to take it on, and then having it develop in so many different iterations in terms of all the different languages that it could be shared in, and in countries where tsunamis and earthquakes are a concern. Was exciting.
So you'd say you had a pretty positive experience working with HSU Press to produce this?
A wonderful experience. It's been great working with Cyril. It's been wonderful working with Kyle. He is amazingly patient person, because it's been challenging working through the whole print on demand and working with the artwork. I think it may be easier when you have a book that's mainly text with some photos, but the images are really important, and the layout's really important to this book, and the translations were very important. So it's been a wonderful experience.
Great. Is there anything else that you would want to add that you had on your mind?
One nice part of working on this project, developing it as a team, we took it to, I used to teach art at local schools, Jacoby Creek School, so when it was in the process of having one of the first proofs, and Mia happened to be visiting from Japan, we took it to, we asked, first off we asked two of the teachers I loved working with if they would review the book, and they did, and one of the teachers, Patty Long, said, "We're having a readathon in the library, why don't you bring the book and you can read it to the students coming through?" And so that was a really wonderful experience. We got to test run the book with students from kindergarten through 8th grade and get their feedback on it. And also Lori was able to share stories about real life student heroes who, because of their tsunami education, had been able to save lives of adults and children and villages, and that's a good thing to pass on to other students, to let them know that their knowledge is really valuable to everyone. So that was a great experience.